Hi, I'm Ernabel Demillo. Welcome to Asian American Life. This month, we're coming to you from the New York Chinese Scholars Garden in Staten Island. This is the first original Chinese garden in the United States to replicate 18th century Ming Dynasty gardens in China. In 1998, a team of 40 artisans from China designed and constructed an impressive network of gardens using elements from nature. Each of these elements represent the philosophy of healing, serenity, and peace. Here, visitors can explore soothing walkways, landscape pavilions, and ponds that transport you back to ancient China. The story we're about to share took a very sad turn this past weekend. Correspondent Minnie Roh explored the topic of Asian Americans and leadership at colleges and universities. She spoke to two college presidents, Gabriel Esteban and Bobby Fung. Tragically, Bobby Fung unexpectedly passed away. To honor him and to share his story of success, we are proudly airing this story.
I'm Minnie Roh. On college and university campuses across the country, you can find Asian Americans everywhere. Students, faculty, deans. And while the numbers are still minute, Asian Americans are also showing up in the most coveted position of all, the president's office. Jim Young Kim, Phyllis Weiss, Bob Suzuki, Renu Kattar, Conrado Gempashaw. These distinguished men and women make up a few of the 1% who broke through the ivory tower to serve as presidents of higher education institutions.
I think you've seen a growth of Asian Americans in faculty ranks probably later on, probably more so in the 80s and 90s, where you've seen a large growth in Asian American faculty members. And now we're seeing in the number of leadership roles, we're seeing more and more, I think, Asian Americans.
Dr. Gabriel Esteban is the president of Seton Hall University, a private Catholic university in New Jersey. A first-generation Filipino, he was part of that generation that pursued higher education in the 80s. He says time, desire, and opportunity will pave the way for more Asians in the top job.
So being open to all the opportunities and grabbing them as they come along, I think will go a long way towards increasing the pool of candidates and leaders.
But consider this. There are over 5,000 degree-granting institutions in the United States, so 1% translates to roughly 40 Asian Americans, which begs the question, is there a glass, or in this case, a bamboo ceiling, when it comes to the top office in academia? Dr. Bobby Fung of Ursinus College says yes, there is.
There's a presumption that Asians are either uninterested in or ill-equipped for leadership positions.
Fung has been president of Ursinus College, a liberal arts school in Pennsylvania, since 2011. Prior to this, he served a decade at the helm of Butler University in Indiana. Despite his personal success, Fung says a disparity exists overall in the numbers for Asian Americans as you go up the chain of command.
There is a sense that somehow Asians are better technocrats than they are leaders, that they're more interested in the sciences because there are clearer results rather than being able to deal with the ambiguities of management. And I would hasten to say that those are all stereotypes.
But it's a stereotype that many Asians are guilty of perpetrating as well. Fung says as a young man, his parents, immigrants from Guangzhou, China, had one dream for their only son.
Like most Chinese of the 1950s, I was supposed to be a doctor. But in my sophomore year, I ended up taking organic chemistry, and that was the end of my pre-med career.
Fung and Esteban came from vastly different backgrounds. One from a Chinese-American household with Confucian values, the other from the Philippines with its heavy Spanish influence. Yet there are similarities. Some may call it culturally influenced behavior associated with Asian Americans as they ascended up the ladder.
It wasn't something I asked for. I mean, I was happy doing the job I was doing.
by and large, our culture tells us not to self-promote, that we contribute to the good of the group. And there's the old Japanese and Chinese adage that the raised nail gets hammered down.
And leadership experts say these are some of the qualities that may hold Asian Americans back from advancing to the next step in their careers.
I definitely think this is a broader challenge than just one industry or sector.
Jane Hyun is an executive coach and leadership strategist who wrote the widely acclaimed book, Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling: Career Strategies for Asians. She explains the path to advancement is threefold. Number 1, be good at what you do. 2, build relationships within and outside of your network. And 3, exhibit your worth for your organization or company.
Women and multicultural professionals, including Asians, tended to spend a lot of time and effort in that first stage, and they were really good at that, right? Good at doing a good job, good at putting your head down, putting that long hours in, being accurate and really reliable. But they had a harder time as they climbed to the top because they didn't spend enough time or expended their efforts on the other two.
Once you've targeted your strengths, you'll need to then reach out to those who can help you.
To move up in a organization or higher ed, in this particular case, people need to get to know you from across campus. It's not just people in your department, because you may be in a department, if you're a faculty member, of 10 people. Okay? And if all your work is in that one department, when leadership opportunities come up, okay, then they may not think of you.
I want to believe that on the whole, the tides of progress will continue forward. I'm actually a little concerned that if we're not vigilant, that we could lose some of those advances.
There is optimism, however, that progress will continue going forth into the next generation of leaders.
What encourages me the most is the number of individuals I've met, Asian Americans, okay, who I've met and said, you know what, I want to take it to the next step. That gives me, a great reason to look forward to a bright future.
Both men say in a few decades, this may no longer be an issue, with plenty of qualified Asian American men and women occupying the president's position. I'm Minnie Roh for Asian American Life.
Winning the Pulitzer Prize in Poetry has put Professor Vijay Seshadri into the international spotlight. He is the first Asian American to win this prestigious award. Paul Lin visited Vijay in his Brooklyn home.
We tend to work in obscurity, and there are many of us, and it's very unusual that the larger world takes interest in poets.
What got its attention was what the Pulitzer Board called a distinguished volume of original verse, a compelling collection of poems that examine human consciousness from birth to dementia in a voice that is by turns witty and grave, compassionate and remorseless. Vijay's book, entitled 3 Sections, won the prize. The number refers to the form of the book: lyric poems, a long prose section, and a long poem. The book opens with Imaginary Number.
Imaginary number. The mountain that remains when the universe is destroyed is not big and is not small. Big and small are comparative categories. And to what could the mountain that remains when the universe is destroyed be compared? Consciousness observes and is appeased. The soul scrambles across the screes. The soul, like the square root of -1, is an impossibility that has its uses.
Vijay is South Asian. He was born in Bangalore, India in the mid-1950s, but he came to the U.S. at a young age. His family settled in Columbus, Ohio, when his father got a job teaching at Ohio State. Not a lot of South Asians there at the time. So Vijay's life and writing have identified more with the American experience, which made things interesting once the world wanted to embrace him as a South Asian poet.
I never identified with myself as a poet and also a South Asian or an Asian. I kind of just thought of myself as an American poet. And one's relationship to literature is, of course, different from one's relationship to society. Because literature, your identity as a writer is given to you by the language you use. You know, and I wrote in American English, and I kind of considered myself a poet of American English, so that was not a big thing for me.
It was, however, a big deal in India. No other person of Indian origin has ever won a Pulitzer Prize for poetry. I
got a flood of interest. I was on TV, as I am now, which was shocking to me, and I was on the radio, and I was called by various news organizations here and also in South Asia, in both India and Pakistan.
Surprising to Vijay, who has lived most of his life in the U.S., including 3 decades in his Brooklyn neighborhood. During his formative years, he identified with the counterculture movement of the 1960s and 70s, hitchhiking to California, living in the San Francisco Bay Area, and writing a novel that he never finished. And that's when, as a young man in his 20s, he set out for the Pacific Northwest to become a commercial fisherman, an adventure he recalls in a prose piece called Pacific Fishes of Canada.
The piece in the book is an account of that experience, although it sort of starts out with a panorama of that northwestern fishing world and then slowly narrows down to my experience on the Bering Sea. The book is really kind of plays with notions of identity, what identity is, what human identity is, what it means to be a person.
The prize winner for poetry is teaching nonfiction writing at Sarah Lawrence College. What appeals to you about the prose and creative nonfiction versus poetry?
I find it easier to teach people how to write prose. And I think writing prose is slightly more teachable because there are mechanical aspects to it. And for me anyway, I think it's easier to teach prose than it is to teach poetry. And I think I was hired by Sarah Lawrence because I had been in the copy department at the New Yorker, so I knew about editing. And I think they were taken with the argument that someone who can edit can also teach people how to write.
It's been quite a journey for Vijay, the teacher, Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, and writer of prose who settled in this quiet Brooklyn neighborhood some 30 years ago, so different from the life he lived in his 20s.
I mean, who would have thought if I had, the first, say, 8 or 9 years of my life after I graduated from college were incredibly adventurous. But since then, since, for example, 1986, I have lived in this apartment, and paid a mortgage, and raised a child, and had a job, and worried about my retirement, and lived an absolutely ordinary outer borough New York City life.
Vijay is already hard at work on his next volume of poetry, as well as a book in prose. I'm Paul Lin for Asian American Life.
Have you ever wondered why Indian American children dominate spelling bee championships? To get the answers, I recently attended one of the toughest spelling bees in the nation.
Forminx.
Forminx. P-H-O-R-M-I-N-X. Forminx?
That's correct.
Sri Ram Hathwar wasn't going to let an ancient Greek instrument get in his way. Last year, he spelled Forminx correctly and won first place in the MetLife South Asian Spelling Bee. He then went on to tie for first place in the country's most famous bee, the 2014 Scripps Spelling Bee in Washington, D.C.
My parents might have been more nervous than me, but I tried to keep it as calm and cool as I could.
Sri Ram is back where it all started, at the South Asian Spelling Bee, but this time as special guest. These 24 from around the country were hoping to follow in Sri Ram's footsteps.
I prepared for several months, every day for several hours, like 8 hours a day, 6, 7, 8 hours a day. So preparing different words, roots, etymology patterns.
I started when I was in 2nd grade, and I've been competing for 4 years.
For Shurov, spelling is a family affair. His sister Sobha is competing against him, and both agree they would not be here without their parents' support.
They're very involved, actually. They guide us, they guide me and my brother both to do our best, and without them, I wouldn't have made it as far as I have.
The Desaris are part of a national phenomenon. Since 1999, South Asians have dominated spelling bees. According to the Associated Press, 15 of the last winners of the past 17 Scripps Spelling Bee have been of Indian descent. That includes Hathwar and Ansun Soju, who tied for first place. They were declared winners after organizers ran out of words. Both also happen to be alumni of the South Asian Spelling Bee, known as a training ground for South Asian spellers. It was started in 2007 by New Jersey businessman Rahul Walia.
It really started off as a marketing program for some of our clients. And that's where we understood that it would be a win-win, where we would be able to not only give back to the community, build a platform for them, but from a marketing standpoint, our sponsors would be able to engage and communicate with that demographic. So that's how we started off, and it just has taken a life of its own. And now we're being called the feeder for the national championship.
The South Asian Spelling Bee, which is open to children whose parents or grandparents are South Asian, now has competitions in 12 cities across the country, attracting more than 1,000 spellers. Regional winners move on to this national competition in New Jersey. According to a recent Reuters news report, nearly a quarter of the 281 contestants in the 2014 Scripps Bee had a last name with South Asian origins. To put that in perspective, Indian Americans make up only 1% of the U.S. population. Northwestern professor Shalini Shankar is currently researching elite spelling bees.
These South Asian children in particular are usually children of professional, well-educated immigrants who more likely than not have emphasized education. So that too plays a role. Thirdly, they were most likely raised in English-speaking households where their parents, even if they can't pronounce all of the words correctly, are quite proficient in English and have been able to help their children with this endeavor.
But she also adds that these kids are willing to put in the hard work, because when you take a closer look at the numbers, it's really just a small percentage of Indian American kids within the community who are elite spellers.
There has to be a real passion from that child to want to do something at this level.
There's one famous study that says like you need at least 10,000 hours of in order to master something. So I think it same applies to spelling bees.
And these elite spellers just love words.
I enjoy doing it, and it's my form of enjoyment. Other people may enjoy other stuff like music or running or whatever they like to do, but I enjoy doing what I like to do, which is spelling.
Sadly, there has been a backlash on social media. Journalist Jeffrey Chu tracks some of the racially charged tweets and published them on Storify. Tweets included this one wondering why the winners in the 2014 Bee weren't American. Hathwar is from Painted Post, New York, and Sujo is from Texas.
You just cannot win at this unless you're going to put in a tremendous amount of work, and to downplay that in favor of some reductive ethnic or racial definition is really to shortchange the work that these kids do.
At this year's South Asian Bee, this 13-year-old was the last kid standing. His word was Becquerel. Oh, just your unit of radioactivity named after a 19th century French physicist. But I'm sure you knew that.
Only the second time at the national finals. What an amazing job. Congratulations, buddies.
Grace Lin, Matt De La Pena, and Jacqueline Woodson are just a few award-winning authors who are changing the way we look at the world. Now they're helping to form a nonprofit based on their campaign, We Need Diverse Books, to address the lack of diversity in children's literature. Lin grew up in upstate New York. She is now an award-winning children's author and illustrator. Her books feature Asian American characters and stories inspired by her Chinese American upbringing. Her debut novel, The Ugly Vegetables, published in 1999, was praised for its diverse narrative, and it was the beginning of her accidental journey as an author of Asian American literature.
Up to that point, a lot of the Asian books were like characters in China, or there were very few to begin with. But this was a very contemporary, very modern Asian American story. And it got a lot of interest for that, and I got a lot of feedback about people who appreciated that. And so I wasn't setting out to create this whole genre of Asian American literature as my portfolio. But as I created more books, I wasn't comfortable with it, but over time, I've kind of worn that label proudly, and it's almost like a badge of honor to me now.
It's a badge of honor now for many up-and-coming Asian American writers of children and young adult books, including lawyer-turned-author Aisha Saeed. Saeed's debut YA novel, Written in the Stars, is about a Pakistani-American girl who is forced into an arranged marriage. Saeed never thought about diversity while growing up. Then she read Shubhanu, Daughter of the Wind by Suzanne Staples.
I remember looking at the cover, and it was a Pakistani girl, and her story is totally different from my upbringing. It was, she was raised in a nomadic family in Pakistan. That was when I realized, when I saw her picture, and I thought, this is the first time I've ever picked up a book where the person looked like me. And then I realized how much I'd missed all my life by not ever seeing myself in print. But until then, it was just such a non-issue. Nobody said it was a problem, nobody talked about it. So I just assumed that my stories were not interesting enough to see print. And so when I saw Shubhanu, I thought, wait, somebody thought my story was interesting. Why aren't there more stories like mine?
Lee & Low, a multicultural publishing company, found a diversity gap in children's books. People of color make up close to 40% of the U.S. population, but they found only 10% of children's books were written by or about people of color.
The mission of Lee & Low is essentially to publish books about everyone and for everyone.
And why is that important? Like, why is that the mission of this publishing company?
Well, because the amount of books that come out are very, very white. And essentially, it's not the world that I live in, it's not the world that you live in. We want books to reflect the way the world really looks.
The Cooperative Children's Book Center studied 3,600 titles in 2012 and found 3.3% were about African Americans, 2.1% about Asian Pacific Americans, 1.5% Latinos, and less than 1% about Native Americans. And books that do feature writers and characters of color are hard to find at local bookstores or libraries.
I think there is a running myth in publishing that books about people of color do not sell, and that keeps a lot of booksellers from stocking them in the bookstores. And so what you have is sort of a vicious cycle that happens, that if the books are not stocked in the bookstores, then of course they're not going to sell, right? So they're saying, oh, look, they don't sell. Well, you never stock them in the first place.
Lee & Low has been leading the battle cry for years now, but it was only recently that the diversity issue made headlines. First in the New York Times editorial section, and then in social media. The campaign, #WeNeedDiverseBooks, was a call to arms after the publishing industry's largest trade convention, known as BookCon, revealed its 2014 all-star lineup of all-white authors. I.W. Gregorio, author of the upcoming YA novel None of the Above, along with dozens of writers, including Aisha Saeed, parents and readers took action via a 3-day Twitter campaign.
I remember being on Twitter that day and having outraged librarians, outraged writers, outraged readers talking about it. The controversy finally reached this breaking point where we were like, we have to do something about it because we've been talking about this for so long. We need to do something. We need to take action.
When a child sees themselves in a story, they know that they matter. They know that people are interested in hearing their stories. And that's important in every way imaginable, not just for the children that are of color, but for people outside the culture to know that these people that may not look like them share the underlying similarities of humanity.
And the organizers of BookCon listen and in response created the panel, "The World Agrees, We Need Diverse Books," in their words, to keep the conversation going. Grace Lin was among the panelists, along with Jacqueline Woodson and Matt Della Pena, writers who have embraced their own diversity. But now comes the biggest challenge: how to turn conversation into action. Action from publishing companies who sign and market authors, from bookstore owners and librarians who decide what belongs on their bookshelves, and from readers who buy the books.
I think We Need Diverse Books is an important example of reader-author activism. And I'm a big advocate of reader activism because it's not enough to say you want something. We just don't have the luxury of sitting back, complaining about something and doing nothing. Really, people have to get involved, and they can't just be asking for diverse books. They have to really want them. They have to buy them, because buying a book can be a political statement.
You can visit the New York Chinese Scholars Garden in Staten Island year-round. They're open 6 days a week. I'm Ernabel Demillo for Asian American Life. We'll see you next time.